Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Daido Anglo-Japanese Foundation. I'm Jason James. I'm in charge of the foundation. We have a couple of old friends of mine, actually, Mark Pearson and Peter Tasker. And shall I introduce both of you, or are you going to introduce Peter? Right, I'll introduce both of you. So, we all actually originate sort of from the financial business, but we're definitely not talking about that today. And in fact, Mark and Peter both still work together in the financial business, but this is about their artistic activities. So Mark's been involved in Japan since 1980, and he has established a photography gallery in Roppongi about 10 years ago, and also publishes photo books. And Peter has, as well as his financial activities, done a wide range of things in Japan. He's written a couple of thrillers, he's also written books about how Japan works in terms of politics and things like this. But he's here to talk about Shuji Terayama, and he started off looking at the films and has got involved in the various other activities, which he'll tell us about. So I'm going to pass over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Jason and Shihoko, and thank you very much for allowing us to share this time today at the Daido Foundation. I'm just going to say a couple of words as introduction and explain what we've done. As Jason mentioned, I've been involved with Japanese photography, Japanese photograph book publishing for much of the past decade. And one day I came across quite an old book, about almost 50 years old, and we've reproduced this book here. It's a book which contains some writings by Shuji Terayama, mixed with some photographs by two of Japan's greatest photographers of the 20th century. So Daido Moriyama, who had a huge exhibition at the Tate last year, and Daido Moriyama's friend and associate and fellow photography revolutionary, Takuma Nakahira. And these two guys, with Shuji Terayama, published a series of articles in the weekly Asahi magazine in the mid-1960s. They were gathered together in a small volume, and to me, this was a fascinating little book. I said to myself, I would love to produce an English version of this book, and being standing associate of Peter and knowing Peter's fascination with Terayama and his works, and particularly his films initially, I talked to Peter and said, do you think we could have a go at making a publication? We looked around for English language versions of Terayama's writings, and he's very well known as a poet as well as an author in Japan, although for this he's very little known outside of Japan. Turns out that I think this is possibly the first and only published translation of Terayama's writings, and we would certainly hope that there will be more in the future. So this publication reproduces the original here. For each essay in that book, Peter has made an extremely fine and interesting translation of the essay, together with the photograph that was published together with each essay. So there's 22 little essays there, and if you would like to have a look at it, it is also for sale, and £50 for a copy of the whole set, and I hope you might come and take a look at it later. So we brought a few today, and we'd rather not carry them home again. So can I introduce Peter Tasker to lead tonight's talk? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So I'm going to talk and show some video clips. And let's start with a video clip, because who is Shuji Terayama? There are two kinds of people here in this room. People who know the answer to that question much better than me, and people who don't. But I'm trying to cater for both of you, so both sides. So let's start.
母ちゃん、今度来た隣の嫁さん、綺麗な人だな。そうかい。昨日縁側で昼寝してるの見たけど、俺の好みだ。母ちゃん。
何？
俺、川かもりの手術しようと思うんだ。
何の手術だって？
川かもり。
誰に聞いたのそんなこと？
誰にも聞かないよ。母ちゃんの読んでた家の光の付録に載ってたんだ。
バカなもの読むんじゃないよ。お前にはちゃんと少年クラブ取ってやってるじゃないか。
あれ、早く手術しないと発育を妨げるんだって。それに不潔だって書いてあったよ。
お前が不良になると母ちゃんが世間の笑い物になるんだよ。
これいつ頃から毛が生えてくるのかな。竜兵はもう生えたって言ってたのに。
しんちゃん、
はい。
あんまり親をバカにすると母ちゃん本気で怒るからね。余計なことに頭使わないで勉強のことは考えてなさい。お前はまだ子供なんだから。しんちゃん、こんな田舎にどこさ行くの？
それじゃ行ってくる。
何しに？
ちょっと死んだ父ちゃんに会いたくなったんだよ。
叱られるとすぐ父ちゃんに詰め打ちしに行くんだから。いつからあんな子になったのかしら。だけど父ちゃんはいた子になんか降りてこないんだから。ナムアミダ仏。父ちゃん、私です。節ですよ。
針箱に針をゆるなり我と我が母との中を縫い閉じもせずたった一つの嫁入り道具の仏壇を入れ目の映るまで磨くなり
もってああお命やお命や地獄の風の人またぎ我はお前の父なるぞ我はお前の父なるぞ
父ちゃん元気ですか？
ああよく俺を呼んでくれた片付けないよく呼んでくれた
今日は見上げないよただ話をしに来た
俺の極楽浄土何の土産も心配いらん俺は今では姿がないがこうしていたこの靴借りて話ができるぞ
なんかうちのことで知りたいことある？あったら話すけど
親子揃って人物いたさば俺の魂はお前の体と共にあるから全てすり尽くしておる特に知りたいことはない
父ちゃん
なんだ
母ちゃん口うるさくて俺困ってんだよ
親子三人一緒に暮らせぬこれもこの世の因果とは知らぬ親の家へつきよく守れ
そんなんじゃダメだよ俺春になったら母ちゃん捨てて家出しようと思ってんだ母ちゃん今度来た隣の嫁さん綺麗な人だな
So I'm going to read from the title essay in this book, which we call Japanese Dream. When I was a kid, my mother was in the nighttime entertainment business. After my father died, there was no other way for her to raise me on her own. She worked in a mining town in Kyushu, and once a month she would send me an allowance and a long letter. As a middle school student, I harbored complicated love-hate feelings towards my faraway mother, and despite her begging, I never wrote her a letter of reply. If there's anything you need, all you have to do is let me know. My mother wrote that in a letter that I put in a desk drawer without even opening the envelope. Even so, there was a time when I wanted a harmonica, so I set that down on a postcard and sent it off. It was the start of a new school year, and I needed a new briefcase too. Before long, a harmonica and a briefcase arrived from my mother. "I've just bought you a briefcase and a harmonica," she wrote. When I put the harmonica in the empty suitcase and shook it, there was a rattling sound that made my heart ache. I picture the evening scene in the mining town. Flickering neon signs, tiny bars, drunken customers desperately singing the miner's ballad. And the middle of all that, the image of my mother wearing some kind of makeup that doesn't suit her at all. I remember being overcome with tears when I saw the harmonica she sent. But I never played that cheap harmonica. It sat forgotten in a desk drawer and went rusty within a year. It was shortly after this that Keisuke Kinoshita's film, A Japanese Tragedy, came out. A mother in the nighttime entertainment business keeps sending home money for the children's sake, but her son can't accept the idea, and his feelings for her gradually fade away. He realizes she has to work as a nightclub hostess in order to make a living, but he continues to blame her all the same. In despair, after being rejected by her own son, the mother throws herself in front of a train and dies. The background to this tragedy is that economic hardship has driven her into the nighttime entertainment business. The film explicitly puts the blame on the war, which caused the father's death and forced the mother to become the sole breadwinner. For this it was highly praised and won the prize for the best movie of the year. But I didn't see A Japanese Tragedy as an anti-war movie. It seemed more like an anti-traditional mother-child relationship movie to me. At a time when misfortune has bound the mother and child together as one, the mother goes off to the world of nighttime entertainment by herself, and the child is left behind. To the child left alone, the mother's work has an atmosphere of so-called immoral activity. But while the mother has a social environment to participate in, the child has been left with nothing. That is frustrating. The crack will not be easily filled. Most of what he says here is totally untrue. Terayama wrote, "I don't write to reveal my feelings, but to hide them." In reality, his mother was not a good-time girl in a mining town. She worked as a cleaner on an American base. He liked to say that his father was a war criminal, but in fact he died of illness in the Philippines, not in combat even. Terayama also used to like to say that he was born in a moving train, therefore he had no hometown. But that was also false. He was born in a hospital like many other people. Terayama had little respect for facts. He preferred fiction, or lies as he put it. A society without lies is a boring society, he said. Lies are the barometer of civilization. Anyway, here are some simple facts about him. I expect many of you know this already, but just for the record, he was born and brought up in Misawa, which is at the top of Aoyama Prefecture, which is in itself Awamori Prefecture, which is itself at the top of Honshu Island. It's very cold up there, and people have a strong accent. He lived through the Awamori air raids when 30,000 people were killed. His father never came back from the war, and his mother did go away to work. And he was spent a lot of time in the house of his uncle, who ran a cinema. Again, he liked to say that I slept on the other side of the screen. That's where my bed was. But again, that's possibly more metaphorical than real. He started writing poetry at 14, and he specialized in tanka, which is a 1,000-year-old format of 5/7/5/7/7, and we actually have some tanka poets here, so I better shut up about that from now on. He started writing at 14, went up to Waseda University at 18, and won a national prize for his poetry in that year. In the same year, he was diagnosed with nephrosis, which is a wasting disease of the kidney, which eventually killed him at the age of 48 and required him to spend a lot of time in a hospital for the rest of his life, time that he spent apparently reading pretty much non-stop. He, at an early stage, started to write radio plays and won the Italia Prize for radio plays in the early 60s. In 1967, he set up the legendary Tenjo Sajiki experimental theatre troupe. I'm wearing the t-shirt. This is their version of Le Petit Prince, right? It's a little bit different from the original version, as you can see. Anyway, so he started this experimental theatre troupe, which went on until his death, and then they disbanded. He continued to write poetry, radio drama, and made experimental films, as well as also being a photographer. And in this book that we produced, 4 or 5 of the photographs are by Terayama himself. He wrote, let me see, how much is it? Over 100 songs, and received a gold record for a song by Carmen Maki. It's called Motherless Child. The mother and the child, very, very big in Terayama's world. There's a lot about mothers and a lot about children and the complex relationship between them. He wrote over 200 books. The last thing he wrote was produced, he wrote it in hospital. Title was How Many Miles to the Graveyard? he knew he wasn't going to be around long. He made a very small number of big budget films in the 70s, and that's a clip from one of them. You can see they're not like your average Hollywood movie. It's more Fellini, Buñuel, Antonioni, that sort of influence, quite strong, but his own world, very much his own world. What else can I say? He became very interested in sport, and he had this sort of Norman Mailer-like view of himself, even though he was not a very well person. But he claimed also that he'd been a very good boxer when he was a teenager, and he was an avid viewer of fights. Of course, boxing was very, very big in Japan in the 1960s. They had a number of world champions. He became very friendly with one, fighting Harada, who was world bantamweight title holder for quite a while. And actually, he's still around, he's still alive, and he attended the funeral of Terayama's widow, which took place last month. She passed away in April this year. He was also very keen on horse racing and gambling, and at one stage he actually owned a racing horse, and he wrote a racing column from the late 60s, basically until he died. And he also appeared in a commercial for the Japan Central Racing Association. And I think we can now actually see that. With a bit of luck, we'll be able to see that commercial.
カモメは飛びながら歌を覚え、人生は遊びながら年老いてゆく。遊びっていうのはもう一つの人生なんだな。人生じゃ負けられないようなことでも遊びでだったら負けることができるしね。人は誰でも遊びっていう名前の劇場を持っててね、それは悲劇だったり喜劇だったり出会いがあったり別れがあったりするんだ。でそこで人は主役になることもできるし、同時に観客になることもできる。人は誰でも2つの人生を持つことができる。遊びはそのことを教えてくれる。
Yeah, so that makes me want to go down to Ladbrokes right away. Terayama was done with tanka by the age of 30, though he continued to write poetry in other formats. And it was quite an interesting comment by the lady who translated a lot of his tanka into English. She said, "Most tanka poets write tanka based on their own experiences. However, Terayama wrote tanka as fiction. His poems read like scenes from a movie, stage play, or short story. The stories he writes in his tanka are quite different from his real life." Anyway, Terayama is, as we know, a big figure in Japan. It was the 30th anniversary of his death last year. Major events took place all through the year in galleries, rock clubs, Tower Records. Do you remember Tower Records? They used to have one in the Piccadilly Circus. It still exists. It carries on in Japan, like many things that have ceased to exist elsewhere. It carries on. There's still Tower Records in Japan, and they used a big poster of Terayama to market their wares. Terayama never had much of a problem with capitalism. As you can see, he was quite happy to go and advertise gambling and racing. And actually, I don't know if you can see this, but on my shirt here it says Jun Ropei. That's a retailer of, I don't think it exists anymore, but it's a fashion retailer. And when he started his experimental theatre group, Tenjo Sajiki, he had no money. So he sent his newly married wife to meet the shacho, the boss of this company, and get sponsorship. And she was clearly very persuasive because he immediately got sponsorship from this company and continued to have it all the way through until he passed away and it disbanded. But Terayama is not well known, so well known overseas. I was quite surprised when I checked out, how available material of any sort is by him here, or even in France, and it's not very, it's very difficult to get hold of, surprisingly so. Various reasons for that. Partly, maybe the kind of Japan you see here. It's not Mount Fuji. It's Terra Mountain. It's a little bit different. It's not really Japan. It's his own world. So it's sort of perhaps different from Jiro's Dream Sushi, or if you see something like that. It's quite a different world that he presents. So perhaps transgresses sort of the standard notion of what Japanese culture should be like. Also, partly because of the nature of what he did. The poetry, as we know, doesn't translate well. Everything is, the poetic bit is what's left out in the translation. And also the kind of impact, power, transgressional power of his theatre work would not really come across unless you were there and saw it. For example, there was a production he did called Knock, and the slogan for that was "Knock on the closed door, knock on the closed heart," and he meant that quite literally. It was a 30-hour performance which took place in a wide variety of different locations in Tokyo, and included a sort of magical mystery tour where people were blindfolded, the audience were blindfolded. You had to be brave, very brave, to sign up for this, and taken off to unknown destinations. Some people were packed into wooden crates, these are members of the audience, and taken away on trucks, again, and unloaded in some sort of warehouse, and to find, well, who did they find? I'm going to pass around some of these postcards so you can see the kind of people. How do you like to come out of your crate and see that guy sort of hovering over you? You can pass that around if you would. So, the kind of impact of this thing. I should also say that it was literally, he meant knock, because they went and knocked on the doors of ordinary citizens in the suburbs without any warning, and announced themselves like that, and said things such as, "What is the meaning of your quiet, orderly life?" And in several occasions, the police was called, and some of the actors were arrested, apparently, for their participation in this. So for that kind of thing, it doesn't translate so well, obviously. You have to be there, definitely have to be there. Philip, can we move to the next clip from Throw Your Books?
という人しまりじゃしょうがないよ。誰も俺の名前なんか知らないの。一度僕さえなろうと決心して3日ジムに通ったらもう怖くなって逃げ出しちゃって、一晩中自分の血のにじんだ包帯見つめていた育児なしだったもんな。誰も俺の名前なんか知らない。高倉健が大暴れした映画の後なんか、まるで自分が2、3人人を切ったような顔をして肩をいからして映画館を出て行ったお前、そのお前よ、あの時お前に何が起こったんだ。何が。俺は忘れもしない。映画館の暗闇の中で一人寂しく泣いてたんだもんね。三平食堂の片隅でカレーライスを食べてた時なんか、捨ててあったその日の新聞読んだというのことをな。太陽暗いだ対馬海峡に墜落、朝鮮少年児方言即死。俺はびっくりして空を見上げた。曇りのち晴れ、時々雨。安物の鉄パイプの翼で飛んで祖国へ帰ろうとした無鉄砲な朝鮮人。お前が飛んだその数メートルの空を羨みながら、 つも風の引き虫だった。自分の重力に泣いている鉄鋼所プレス工、月給が28,000円の人力飛行機の俺だもん。誰も俺の名前を知らない貧しい工場街のヤクザな裏通り、洗濯干し場の隅っこの、または失敗続きの人生の養老院の壁に、入れなかった大学の教室の黒板に、公衆便所の壁に、街中の至るところに俺は書き殴る。自分のアリバイだ。さあ、もう一度しか言わないから覚えていてくれよ。俺の名前は、俺の名前は、俺の名前は、俺の名前は、俺の名前は、俺の名前は。本籍青森県上北郡六戸村大安座伊能土生、氏名北村英明、昭和24年10月11日六戸村古間木にて出生、母稲届け出、同月14日受付入籍、祖父亀吉死亡、祖母留父正治、母育死亡、少女説、この標本は戸籍の原本と相違ないことを認証する。ばあさんは万引き常習犯の亀の子たわし、親父は戦争犯罪人の負け犬、妹は人間嫌いのウサギ変態。そして我が家は新宿区戸塚1丁目33の9の家畜小屋だ。
お前また出かけるの？出かけるなら食べたいことがあるのよ。
なんだよ。
ハガキ1枚出してきて。
ハガキ？
うん。
またクイズか。やめろよもう。
だけどお前ね、今度はハワイ旅行だよ。
ハワイ旅行？
当たったらマジで釣りたいよ。いいじゃないかよ。
無線会社よ。ハワイなんかさ、俺どうやっていいんだよ、本当は。 からさ、この前から先生あんだろ、あれ返してくれよ。明日は使う人があるんだ。酒なんか飲まないで。はい、買って。
お前わかるかい？
うん。
食いたけどさ。いや、こういう問題だ。使うとき使わないで。使わないで使うもの。
いや、2000円返せよ。
使うとき使わないで、使わないとき使うものだよ。考えろよ、お前。うん？
信じる人があんたのことなんて言ってるか知ってるか？
あんたではありません。お父さんと言いなさい、お父さんって。
お父さん。
うん？
またあれだ。のびの覗いたろ、管理人の部屋の。
誰がそんなこと言ってるんです？いい加減なこと言うと許しませんよ、お父さんは。
節子が見てたそうだよ、節子が。
節子が？
うん。そうだ、もういいだろ。もういいよ。
どこ行くんだよ。何時に帰る？うん。はがきだけ頼むね。あ、いつもあれなんだから。親を何と思ったんでしょうね。
Yeah, families, yeah. Okay. So part of the Terayama performance is not just the film or the play. There's an ambience that surrounds it. It involves the posters, as you can see, these posters. Actually, on one of the posters I saw a couple of weeks ago, he had a list of, this was a theatrical performance, of the kind of people who could get a discount. And they were jockeys, strippers, long-distance truck drivers. They can come in half price. So, you know, it was part of the act, part of his world. Likewise, the music, actually in this book, he talks, there's a lot of discussion of the Japanese pop music of the 60s, and mainly an enka and stuff like that. But in his films, he went for this sort of hard rock type background. And I don't know if anybody here has read quite an interesting book called Jap Rock Sampler by Julian Coke, who's the lead singer with the Teardrop Explodes, 1980s band, which is totally forgotten now, I think. But he's actually written quite a learned book about pop music and rock music in the 60s and 70s in Japan. God knows how he found out about that. But he tells the story in the book of how Terayama met the guy who writes the music for all his soundtracks and many of his theatrical performances too, who calls himself J. Ernest Caesar, and that's his name, nom de guerre, J. Caesar. And he was a hippie from Kyushu who showed up in Shinjuku in the late 60s with no money, nothing, and he happened to go into a coffee bar, and there was Terayama, and they got talking, and then Terayama said, "I want you to do the music for my films and my theatre." He said, "Well, I can't play any instruments, and I don't know anything about music at all." So that's exactly what I want. And so that's how he got this guy to set him off on his musical career, which he's still doing. And it's interesting that many of the people who are involved with Terayama are still sort of involved with him now, 30 years after he's gone. But randomness was part, again, randomness is always beautiful. That was another of his epigrams. The films, there are 4 films, and we just seen some clips from two of them. The pastoral, they've all got numerous titles, and the titles that he used for his films were also titles he used for his tanka collections and for his books of essays. So there are multiple works by Terayama called Throw Away Your Books and Run Into the Street, which have got absolutely nothing to do with each other, just to confuse the issue even more. He ended up, I think, making a not particularly good film with Klaus Kinski in it, which is called The Story of O, Part 2. I'm not going to recommend that. You see an awful lot more of Klaus Kinski that you really need to. Anyway, the book of essays also focuses on many outsider figures that were dear to his heart, as mentioned: truck drivers, strippers, massage girls, boxers, directors of porn movies, lotteries, and people who run away from home, which he strongly approved of. He wrote an essay called Recommendation to Run Away from Home. If you know the sort of dripping wet Beatles song, She's Leaving Home, which is seen from the parents' perspective, it's a completely different thing. He sees it from the perspective of someone running away, and he says, yes, run away, you've got to run away. Like the boy said, I want to get rid of my mother, as we can see a little bit later. He actually literally wants to get rid of his mother at some point. And also freak shows. And there was a culture of freak shows in Japan going back into the pre-Meiji era, and there is still a freak show in Japan in Hanazono Shrine in Shinjuku. It's much tamer these days. They don't actually eat the snakes these days, but they do eat sort of worms and things, and come out of their nose. Anyway, enough of that. Maybe this is a good time to show the clip about the freak shows.
濁流に捨て腰もゆるまんじゅ下げ赤きを何の生贄とせん。見るために両目を深く盛んとすカミソリの刃に地平を移し
ねえ、ちょっと入ってらっしゃいよ。
俺ですか？
そうよ。坊やいくつ
？15。
じゃあもう一人前じゃないの。いい子だからね。あそこに空気入れがあるから持ってきてちょうだい。ここんとこ刺してちょうだい。それでね、力いっぱい踏んでちょうだい。
こうですか？
ダメね。もっと力強く。
よし、ちょっと待ってね。こう。
でもよくないな。だって膨らんでこないの。
Freak shows one more time. Roll up to see this strange and pitiful child. Yes, folks, the sins of the parents become the karma of the children. A hunchback dwarf with a long floppy neck. What an amazingly beautiful little bear girl, deformed with a tumour and no navel. The entry fee is 10 sen for poor folk and 100 sen for the rich. Such was the Barker's spiel in the good old days. Now the sad monsters of the freak shows have completely disappeared. Today's greatest freak show is taking place far across the sea, featuring the super skilled killing and bombing acrobatics of Vietnamese soldiers. When I was young, I loved freak shows. If you could pay the cheap entrance fee, you got to see a real live nightmare. My aunt, still a virgin at the age of 50, used to sit by my bedside at night and read the Bible to me. In the dark, they dig into houses, and by day they shut themselves up. They do not know the light. Morning is the same to them as the shadow of death, for they are friends with the terrors of the shadow of death. Book of Job, chapter 24. This was frightening. I couldn't sleep at night. In my mind's eye, the ones digging into houses were the monsters of the freak shows. The man with the iron stomach, the human pump, rubberneck, cyclops, and bear girl. According to the research of Morihiko Fujisawa, these monsters of the freak shows came in 57 categories and 23 subcategories of bodily deformity, 10 categories and 8 subcategories of skin-related deformity, 2 categories and 6 subcategories of hair-related deformity, and 5 categories of tumours and swellings. I was overjoyed when they appeared at the shrine in my hometown, around the time of the autumn festival of the Seven Grasses. Dear Mrs. Snake Lady, I hope you are well. I wonder at what distant shrines you are exhibiting your sticky, scaly skin these days. The Master of Ceremonies said that your sad fate was caused by your parents' sins. But I could never believe that. Those snakeskin scales of yours were really beautiful. I could never forget the shock of that instance when, to the twang of a shamisen, you suddenly showed off that beautiful snaky skin. It was like a nightmare. After your troupe left, I told my schoolmates all about it, and one of the senior boys laughed at me. You idiot, you really think that the curse of the snake could be transformed to the skin of a human? That was just a tattoo, he said. Dear snake lady, that skin of yours, is it really just a tattoo? Or rather, as the master of ceremony said, did the results of your parents' sins just suddenly appear one night? Could you please tell me? When I was young, I wrote this letter, but never sent it. The reason being that I had no idea where the travelling artistes of the Snake Ladies' troupes were pitching their tent next. Freak shows, which we define as the exhibition before the public of birds and beasts and variety performers, are displays of deformity and grotesqueness and are strictly forbidden hereafter. This ordinance, issued by Tokyo Governor Tadahiro Okubo in the 6th year of the Meiji era, was introduced in Rinpu Sasagawa's History of Perverse Customs in the Meiji era. But as far as I was concerned, birds and animals and variety performers and acrobats and circus acts were far from being displays of deformity, because within the grotesque fiction of what appear to be disgraceful exhibitions, we catch a glimpse of hell and thereby open our eyes to the harmony of everyday reality. At the entrance of one tent, there was an advertisement for the world-famous shark woman, with the upper body of a woman and the lower body of a shark. In a display was a bottle containing a fetus pickled in alcohol. It floated in the murky liquid as slimy as cod roe. Next to it, something that looked like a thick clump of yarn was floating in an ancient bottle. What's that? I asked. A human heart, the old shamisen player informed me. I was shocked. A human heart? The first time you see one? The old shamisen player carefully picked up the bottle and gave me a sniff of what was inside. The intense stench scorched my nostrils. Why do you take something like that around? I asked. I can hardly throw it away, the old man answered. It's my own mother's heart, you see. Mothers have a hard time in the world of Terayama. My own first knowledge of Terayama came basically in the early 80s when he was arrested, strangely. And he was arrested for entering someone's garden and standing there watching them through the window. I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. What was he doing? Was he going to steal something? They did steal things for the Tenjo Sajiki. They basically all their props came from the dump, and for one performance they needed a gravestone, so they just went to the local graveyard and took a gravestone. But what was he doing? And that struck me as very interesting. I've got my own theories about that, but I'll mention it later. But as I got more interested in his films in particular, and his world in general, what fascinated me was that it was his own world. Most Japanese writers and artists of many sorts, their primary foundational fact is that they are Japanese, and that is a very, very important part of what they do. As you may know Kawabata's famous Nobel Prize oration, Japan, the Beautiful and Myself. It's impossible to imagine Terayama writing something like that, Japan, the Beautiful and Myself. Totally impossible. You can see the general Japan, the world of Japan that we see very often in the West, and how in some cases is presented through official sources. Of martial arts, well, Terayama didn't like martial arts at all. He liked boxing and racing. No kendo, judo, none of that stuff. Likewise, sushi, kaiseki ryori. That's not his scene at all. Curry rice, ramen, Today, he would not be in Skiabashi Jiro restaurant in Ginza. He would be in the Mossburger across the road with the lady boys and massage girls, talking to them. So he has a different concept. His concept, his primary fact is that he is Terayama, and you take that or you leave it. And in all his work, there is a recycling of themes and icons. The mother, the running away from home, the freak shows, as we've seen, the father who's either a war criminal or he's dead or he's up in Terror Mountain communicating to you through a shaman. You may see in almost every film he produces, there's an image of a little girl with a red satchel walking through a village. And that's in almost everyone, including the porno one with Klaus Kinski. He has the little girl with the red satchel wandering around in that. So he's got his own world, his own iconography. And the mother, of course, and the hometown is seen in quite a different way. If you ever listen to Enka ballads, it's very sentimental about the hometown. And the mother, of course, is something you owe absolutely everything. Well, for Terayama, it's a bit different from that. And his attitude to his mother, you've seen it already. She's usually played by a transvestite in the films. But maybe we can have that last clip about the mother sequence.
もう帰れないよ。
私と一緒に東京に行く？
待ちくたびれてうとうとしていた私は我に返った。20年前の私は現在の私を裏切ってどこかへ行ってしまったのだ。私は自分で母を殺さなければならなかった。縄と草刈りママと、そして一末の不安と。母は私の吐く唾だ。唾の中でも一番薄い唾だ。母ちゃん。
しんちゃん、遅かったね。どこさ行ってたの？外寒かっただろ？上がれ。おめえ、足拭いたか。座れ。腹すいたかな？今すぐご飯にすっからな。
どこからでもやり直しはできるだろう。母だけではなく私さえも私自身の作り出した一編の物語の主人公に過ぎないのだから。そしてこれはたかが映画なのだから。だがたかが映画の中でさえたった一人の母も殺せない私自身とは一体誰なのだ。生年月日昭和49年12月10日。本籍地東京都新宿区新宿。あざ恐山。
friends in Shinjuku, the mother too. Well, that's a brief introduction to the world of Terayama, and you can find out more in these books that we've produced, and I think I would be delighted to answer any questions I possibly can.